Good morning, everyone. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Thank you, God, for bringing us safely together, for surrounding us, whether in person or in families, long distance, or friends in various places, or even virtually, for surrounding us with people who love us, who live out your love for us. We come as an act of love, not simply seeking to be organized ourselves, but to leave a gift, provide a gift for those who will help us in our last days and settle our affairs when we have gone on into the fullness of your kingdom. Guide us not only today, but in our preparations. Help us to laugh together occasionally as well. In Christ's name, amen. Okay. There are extra copies of the note-taking sheets should you need one. My intention was one book for each household. Again, you do not owe me anything for these books. I have a generous expense allowance. Keep the microphone closer to me, please. Okay. Brian, I do have a copy you can look at, I think, now. So Janet, I will leave you one at the church. If anybody else didn't get one, let me know and I will find one for you. Let me tell you a couple of stories I've come across since last week when I've mentioned to people that I was teaching this class. Another pastor asked what we were including, and I told her, and she said, be sure to tell people as they plan their estates to think of what their decisions are communicating to others. Her mother had died recently, and she is one of 4 children. One of them is estranged. The other 2 are very well off financially and in careers that suggest they will continue to be well off financially. She is a pastor and is not so well off financially. And her mother decided that because her siblings were financially secure, she would leave everything to the daughter, whose income was substantially less. But she didn't communicate that to the other siblings. And so now they think that she manipulated her mother, and it's messy. At best, it will probably result in strained relationships and in worst case, legal action. So emphasizing the importance of communication with those you are leaving behind. Another situation, a death of a parent, children needing to clean out the house and sell it. One of the kids called the homeowner's insurance company and learned that it's now considered an unoccupied dwelling and they won't insure it. So between now and when the house is sold, either it's uninsured or they have to figure out who's going to insure it. So checking with those who provide your financial security, such as insurance, to make sure that you're covered, or what somebody needs to do to get you covered is another little item that could go on your list. I am pretty organized. No, I am not organized at all. Sorry, that's really what it says on my notes. The pretty much is, I know pretty much where everything can be found. But sometimes the answer is, well, it's either in that pile or in that pile. And 95% of the time, at least, I can lay my hands on it. But nobody else would know where to look, or at least they wouldn't be able to narrow down the files. So if I were to be hit by a bus tonight, Brian would not know where to find the important paperwork. He might not even know what he needed to be looking for. So I talked last week about putting everything in a notebook, all of your information in one place, or at least instructions all in one place, so that whoever needs to figure out your affairs, and again, whether you are unable to do it yourself or whether you have already died, knows what information exists and how the person who has access to it needs to do to get into your files, to talk to your attorney, your accountant, to get into your safe deposit box if you have one of those, all of the information in one place, even if you don't have the details of that information in one place. They have instructions of where to find it. It doesn't have to be an actual notebook. It could be on a computer, as long as someone knows it's on the computer and someone has access to that computer. We have heard various news stories. I think one of the terrorist attack in California a couple of years ago, somebody had an iPhone, and Apple is notorious for protecting the information that people have on their iPhones and not letting anybody, even the US government, break into those. So someone needs to know how to get into that phone, or if you've got your computer password protected, how to get into your computer. If you don't have a computer or you have this information elsewhere, that's point, you don't need to worry about that password. And then the other thing is, keep in mind that if you can get hit by a bus, the person you live with could be there with you when you get hit by a bus. And so it might be helpful to have at least one other person, to have at least some vague idea. If you don't trust your family, maybe it's an attorney. I don't know, but somebody ought to have an idea of how to settle your affairs and how to have access to the information they need. So I suggested you start that notebook with the information that we gathered last week, or that I gave you the booklet to take care of at home if you weren't here last week. The spiritual and emotional information of what's important to you, what you want to happen to the extent that there is some control over the circumstances surrounding your death. And we'll give you some more things today to think about. If you have already, if I thought you were going to be online today, I had already given you a copy of the book, and you may have looked at it. Don't get overwhelmed. Start with one piece, work on that piece. I found it to be pretty user-friendly. That doesn't mean that the book's authors, who seem to think the same patterns I do, will think in the same patterns you do. So take one little bite at a time. Today, we're going to be talking about people and passwords and other identifying information. That's kind of the general topic today. So there are items in this book. There is a whole section that deals with legal and financial issues. I am not a professional in those areas, and so I will leave that up to others for you to talk about, but you can get some good background information on what you might need to ask about, or check off what you've already done. And this coming week, Wednesday evening at 7 or 7:30. I think it's 7. We'll have some people both here and online from legal services to give an overview of the legal parts of this and answer questions you have. No, it's Wednesday night. They preferred a weeknight, but we're recording all of these. So they'll be available on YouTube. I can give you the link to them on YouTube. 7. Yeah, okay. So all I gave you was a note-taking sheet today, because just about everything I'm going to say, unless I've come up with a couple of funny stories, is going to be in those books. So we're going to start with passwords, codes, and identity documents. Now, I know that not everybody has an online life. And if you don't, then this section of your notebook or folder, or whatever you have, is going to be pretty small, but it probably won't be non-existent. Even if you don't do anything online by choice, there are still some things you need to know or have access to in terms of identity documents. You may not call it a password, but it functions the same way in face-to-face or telephone interactions as a password. A couple of family stories. When I was pretty young, probably 4 or 5 years old, I remember going to the bank with my father. And as identification, they asked him for his mother's first name. Maiden name is common, but they asked him for his mother's first name. Now, I knew my grandmother's name was Reen, and it was short for Arthurine. She was named after her father. And so Dad said, Arthurine. And the lady said, nope. Okay, it's the only thing I'd ever heard my grandmother called. And Dad said, try Esther. It's the only time I ever heard that used, but her name was Esther Arthurine. And he was so used to her being called Reen that he hadn't even thought of it right at the beginning. Another one, my mother, who had recently given up driving, and her license had also expired. And I told her that she needed to get a state ID because she does fly from time to time. And I had a hunch that an expired driver's license might not cut it, at least with some TSA agents. She lives in a different state, which makes this a little more challenging. And I also thought she might want to have the real ID, even though that has been pushed back. Eventually, she's going to need that to fly anywhere, it's in my understanding. So you'd think that it wouldn't be a problem. She had a driver's license in her own state. The picture on it looked like her. She had a passport. She had a birth certificate. And I called the driver's license bureau. It's not the Secretary of State in Virginia, but I called whoever was in charge of that to find out what documents she needed to take. I wrote everything down for her, where she needed to go, when she needed to go. It still took 3 trips to the driver's license bureau because she needed her marriage certificate because her birth certificate had one last name and her marriage certificate had another. But she didn't have an official copy of the marriage certificate. So then we had to figure out how to get one of those from the county where she was married. Fortunately, I have a cousin who still lives there, and I was able to get the information with only a short message and not a phone call. So having your identity documents someplace that other people can find them and a record of those documents, at least, if not copies of the documents in this notebook or compilation, is helpful. So what numbers or words do you have recorded somewhere or safely stored in your head that might be used to provide your identity, might be needed to provide your identity? This social security number. You don't need passwords. No, we'll get to passwords. You're talking about numbers, names, driver's license. Okay. Passport, yep. Military discharge papers, mother's maiden name, grandmother's maiden name, bank account number, the name of the institution. Somebody else might need that. That's not really providing your identity, but it's certainly getting access to your information. Do you have an automatic garage door opener that has 4-digit passcode on it? Okay, we do. You have combination locks anywhere? Anywhere important that somebody else might need to get into? Our suitcases would be useful without either that combination or the instructions on how to reset the combination. Medical records, that's getting to be more and more online. Home security system, if you have one of those, it's got a password and probably a safe word. I was taking care of somebody's house once and turned off instead of turned on or vice versa. And so the alarm went off when I'd been in the house for 10 minutes. And I didn't know the safe word, but fortunately the company, when they called, had a record of the password and I was the passcode, and I was able to tell them that and they didn't arrest me. It wasn't your house, Carol. I did take care of your house when you had a security system, but it wasn't yours. Right. Your utilities, your phone, your internet provider, your Comcast, your cell phone, whose name is it in? Is there a code you need to use? I've got one on my cell phone that I can tell them, you know, yeah, this is my safe word or my secret question or whatever. I know the answers to that. If I call them, not just accessing it online, but if I call them, there's a safe word that I can give so that, you know, if Brian has it, they know it's okay for him to access that account since it's in my name. Okay, as far as digital passcodes, so any of these you don't have, you can feel free to ignore this part of it. Your phone may have an unlock code on it. You don't want to be in the situation of having to have somebody's fingerprint to unlock it when that person is no longer around. That's the stuff of TV shows, but not real life, hopefully in your case. Your computer may have a password, an unlock code on it. There are probably some passwords that are more important than others. I mean, nobody needs to know my account number for Cokesbury, which is the United Methodist Publishing House, which for years has handled the Presbyterian materials as well. The church can set up another one of those. On the other hand, somebody might want my Amazon passcode to get rid of, to take credit cards off that account, to get off some recurring subscriptions that are going to be billed to that credit card. My Amazon Prime and Washington Post that renews every year. It's not going to show up on my bill every month. So somebody should probably know at least the key things you use all the time. If you have an Apple account, they probably want to be able to get into that. Facebook, if you use that to communicate with people, or another social media that all of the people who need to know about your funeral arrangements are on. And those accounts can be memorialized too, or transferred to another person if you've got the right information to do that. Your banking, any of that that's online, or if you've got passwords for that because you access it online, your heirs should probably have access to that information. Any benefits that you access online. In addition, passwords do change. Email addresses change. I still have something that shows, I mean, I've got an old email address that I use. Those of you who use it, it's sbcglobal.net. One of these days, I'm going to change it to something because we're going to get rid of our AT&T account, and then that's what it's associated with. But I have an old one called Voyager, and every once in a while, I still run into something that I signed up for under the Voyager account. So every online account you have has a password. Now, there are password managers, and some of you may have those that generate new passwords for all of those different accounts. It is more secure. I don't use one, and I'm not in a position to advise about those. But that's something you're going to see referred to in the book, and some suggestions of some of them that the authors of this book think are good choices. So, and if you have one of those, then you only have to memorize one main password. But then somebody else has to know that main password if you can't access the account anymore. So every online account has a password. So your record should include where you keep those passwords, at least the ones that somebody would need to know. Again, your shopping accounts, they'll probably be out there forever in cyberspace, but once your credit card's canceled, doesn't really matter that much. But again, I mentioned if you've got an annual subscription to something, if there's more than one person on that credit card, so you're not canceling it, that bill's going to come again. And whatever email address is associated with them. Now, we talked last week, you're going to need to decide your own level of security. Are you going to leave this list written down somewhere? Is it going to be written down but hidden in somebody else's house so that nobody who breaks into your house is going to be able to find it? I don't know what's best for you, but these are the kinds of things somebody else may need to know. Yeah, sure. So I don't have to repeat it.
Yeah, okay. Before my Dave passed away, his son came to visit, and I didn't know this ahead of time, but anyhow, Dave had written down all his passwords. Oh, I don't know, he had a bunch of them. And then Davis and him had been talking. So anyhow, after he passed, Davis' family had come, and so he's going through it all, getting into most of the accounts except one. And I had no idea what the passwords for these accounts. So anyhow, one was left. And so it was Sunday morning and I went in to the computer, and I'm talking to Dave. I'm saying, and this is after he passed. And I said, Dave, you got to help us. You got to, come on, help me. Tell me what the password is. And all of a sudden, this password came into my brain. I put it in and it opened it up. So. Yes.
I still haven't learned what happened with my brothers, but I think I mentioned last week, they had to break into his business computer because he hadn't left that password with anybody. So, yeah. Right. That's actually my next section is finances, but yes, there's probably different ways to access those. You may have a beneficiary on your account already. The person who's handling your affairs will need to know who to contact about that. And again, there's a section in here on finances. And so we're not going to deal with finances in this class. But if you don't have that stuff, we do have a couple of people in the church that I can send you to, Teresa Sun, Lynn Kenworthy, that might help you if you don't already have a person, be able to figure out what you need to do to put that kind of thing in place. But yes, someone will need to know how to notify those companies, pensions, IRAs, life insurance, any other insurance. You probably should know, is it just in your spouse's name if you're married, or are both of your names on it? Your home, whose name is it in? How does that property transfer to you? Those are some of the kinds of questions that you need to be asking. So that brief enough for today, Christy. Thank you. Dawn, sorry. Okay, if you have joint life insurance, move on it quickly. Knowing what's in your policies and your documents is helpful. They had a 90-day period on hers. Carol? Yes. Safe deposit box. Kathy's shaking her head no. Is that Michigan? Okay. So Michigan, at least when Kathy worked at the bank, as soon as they looked at the obituaries first thing in the morning and would lock down boxes. Okay. They can't lock it down if someone else's name is on it. Yeah, ask your bank. Okay, if it's a sole box, that is state law. I think I mentioned this last week, but it doesn't hurt to repeat things over and over again. My parents live in a city that's in 2 states. If their safe deposit box had been in Tennessee, my mother would not have been able to get into it when Dad died, even though it's a joint box. Because they lived in Virginia and the box was in Virginia, the law was different. She was able to get into it. So ask your attorney or your bank what the law is if you have a safe deposit box. Don't put your will in your safe deposit box, at least not with a copy of it somewhere else. And don't put your medical power of attorney, healthcare proxy, those kind of documents. Don't have the only copy of that be in your safe deposit box where somebody else can't get to it. If the person who you've given the bank on their signature cards to have access to that box, whether it's a joint box or whatever the bank asks for and allows in this state, doesn't have a key, then that person needs to know where the key is to your safe deposit box as well. Same goes for lockbox in your house, although that's probably easier to break into than getting into a safe deposit box at the bank that you don't have access to. A lot of people don't use those anymore. Some people still do. Okay. Important digital path. So banking and benefits, all of the information that, we'll just say your heirs, your executor, your family needs to get into that, needs to be somewhere where they have access to that information when it's needed. Whether your notebook has a clue to tell them where it is, even though it's not written right there, or the actual information is written right there, depending on your trust level and how you're planning to keep this secure, as long as you're living, but accessible when you're not living or not able to handle matters yourself. So written document or digital document that somebody knows how to find. Password manager, probably only in your head, is not the best way. All right, I mentioned money and where it lives. Something about your money and where it lives needs to be in this record. Your assets. Now, you don't need to list how much money you have, but you need to have a record of where it is or who inherits. Yes, where it is. It's not about who inherits it. That's taken care of either in your will or as a beneficiary on a policy or a joint name on an account. It's not about the best method of transferring it to someplace else, but it's compiling an organized list of your assets in order to pass on the information. In the book on page 16, there are 4 categories that are listed. Liquid assets, slush money, which is money that's tied up but can be accessed under the right circumstances, reserves that are tied up. You don't need to memorize this. It's all here in writing for you. You can take it home. Money that's tied up but can be accessed under the right circumstances, reserves, tied up but has penalties if you withdraw it too soon, and then what they call ICE, money that isn't money but could be made liquid under the right circumstances, like life insurance policy value, land, businesses, equipment, valuable assets like jewelry or collections, intellectual property, patents, copyrights and trademarks, rewards, and miles. Airplane miles, airline miles can be transferred to somebody else. And then there's also cryptocurrency. I don't know if any of you have cryptocurrency. I don't, I've never dealt with it, but if you do, it's an asset. Somebody else needs to know how to access it on your behalf. Don't worry about things that someone might sell on eBay, but if you have something really valuable, and especially if someone else doesn't know it's really valuable, I mean, Beanie Babies aren't worth a lot in terms of estates, even collectibles. My mother has a ton of Hummel figurines. I imagine at some point she bought them because she liked them, not because she thought they'd be valuable to us, but they don't have a whole lot of value out there in the marketplace. We had a painting at the church that it was almost funny between some of us, but it was left to us out of someone's estate. Used to hang out here in the narthex. There's a picture of a cow grazing in a field, so a pastoral scene. There was a tiny church in the background, and the church decided to sell it back in 2005, when we had our Miracle Sunday to raise money for some capital improvements and mission. And the only person that objected to it, I didn't learn about until later, and he withdrew his objection when he learned that we got over $12,000 for it at auction. Nobody realized how much it was worth, except the person who took it to an auction house had a suspicion that it might be. So if you've got a painting like that, you don't want it ending up in a thrift store somewhere. You want your heirs to know that they ought to at least have that checked into. If you've got jewelry in a safe deposit box, some of those kinds of things. Besides listing what the assets are, probably ought to list how to access it, whether that's calling somebody, whether it's an account number or a PIN number, depending on the level of trust. With a death certificate, your heirs can probably get into it. I don't know if Apple takes death certificates to unlock an iPhone or not, but otherwise death certificates will open a lot of avenues. But how to access something, if you have a personal contact, a broker or an advisor or something like that, their name and phone number will help people to track things down. Remember, when you're grieving, your brain isn't always working at 100%. In fact, it's probably not working at 100%. So the more record that you are comfortable putting in this compilation, the easier it will be for whoever is dealing with your affairs. Location of relevant paperwork. Is it in the big file cabinet in the basement? Is it in your personal lockbox? Is it at the bank? Whatever, but somebody. If you have prepaid funeral arrangements, someone needs to know how to access that information. Any benefits that either need to be stopped or transferred to another person. You don't want them to keep coming. Social Security, pension, disability, unemployment, an annuity, alimony or child support and related court decrees, lottery or prize money. You're getting $1,000 a week for life. Probably considered fraud if you die and your heirs keep receiving that money, unless it was set up that way initially. If you have a reverse mortgage on your home, somebody needs access to the records on that. So again, you know, a list of what these things are, details of how you get paid, who the contact person is if you have one of those, relevant account numbers, employee numbers. We mentioned safe deposit box. Also, in addition to giving someone access to the safe deposit box, make sure they know they have access to it. And if you're recording on your list of things that you have a safe deposit box, you might want to record who has access to it. If someone else is angry about it, oh, well, you won't be around for them to be angry about it. Now, that's in spite of what I said at the beginning about thinking of the impact it's going to have on people. Your home. Now, there's two completely different ways that this needs to be addressed depending on your circumstance. If there are at least 2 adults in your home and you were suddenly not there, what would the other person not know how to do? There's equipment in your home, appliances, there's that have manuals somewhere, maybe, or maybe they came with a quick start card and you have to look online for the rest of it or call a company to get them to send you a paper manual. Who gets the furnace serviced? Who knows what company you use to do that and how often it's done and when it's due again, or who to call if it breaks down. Now, yes, you can look up or ask your friends for references, but if you've got a routine, who knows that information, and it needs to be possibly written down for the other person. Routine home maintenance that needs to be done, all of those kinds of things. Utilities, whose name is on the utility? I'm pretty sure our phone is just in my name, or I'm on the primaries. I'm the primary one on it because it was my number before we got married. So we probably need to know what happens if I die first and we still have that phone number. Can Brian keep the number? And we discovered when Brian's mother moved from one apartment to another in the same facility that not everybody is real willing to take it on someone's say so other than hers that she has moved. So, okay, how are you going to work those kinds of things out? Again, a death certificate will get you a long way, but not with everybody. If you are a one adult household and you were suddenly not there, what would someone else need to know between now and the completion of settling your estate? Who else has keys to your house? Just, I don't know what it is for you, but what would someone else need to know? Who has your homeowner's insurance was another one of those. Where are the owner's manuals kept if they exist? What needs to be done on a routine basis? Is there anything that's quirky about your home that somebody else might not even think of? We have a furnace drain that needs to have bleach poured into it quarterly to keep mold and mildew from. We have enough trouble remembering that between two of us. Would just one of us remember? Who knows? We have one screw-in fuse in spite of the fact that our electric service has been updated several times. There's something on the furnace that has a screw-in fuse. You know, if you can't get the furnace to work and everything else you've tried seems to work fine, look for that fuse. We have a car that uses more oil than average that needs to be monitored. If Brian and I both were hit by a bus together, somebody probably needs to know that about that particular car. Are there any instructions that somebody else might need? I abdicated running the television and stereo when we got married. As a result, I don't know how to do that anymore. I could probably figure it out, but is there something with electronics with various inputs that you could write down to make it easier on the person who doesn't normally do that? How to renew a prescription online. Brian's sticking his thumb up, okay, for the people that are with us online. How do you renew a prescription online if that's the way that your insurance prefers that you do it? Is there any property that is not in your home or on your property that belongs to you? This piano does not belong to the church. It belongs to somebody else. Her estate needs to be aware of that. Do you have a storage unit? I mean, if it's something that's not very valuable, it's not an issue. I've got books loaned out all over the place, but if it's got some value, somebody needs to know that that exists. Otherwise, your storage unit may end up on the Storage Wars television show at some point. There are good instructions in the book on pages 32 to 34 about doing a walkthrough of your home to figure out what needs to be recorded. I'm going to take a minute for a break and get a drink if anybody else needs to stretch or go to the restroom. Probably going to be shorter today than we were last week, but go ahead and stretch. As far as the various paperwork and such I'm handing out, you know, do what is helpful for you. If you don't want to write your own obituary, don't write your own obituary. Give Dawn a second to come back. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Yep. Yep, having a secondary beneficiary, because if you're married, or have an adult child that's, you know, the two of you or your whole family, it's possible that you might both die at the same time, and then the money becomes immediately successful. I mean, you have the option. Repeat. Okay. So more about the secondary beneficiaries.
I was just gonna mention it. My parents have family trust.
Mhm.
My sister and I.
Yeah. Family trusts can make things easy. Again, this is not an area I am equipped to talk about. It is something you might ask the attorneys next week for some basic information on if they don't bring it up. But I've worked with several families that had family trusts set up, and then money transfers pretty easily and avoids probate, right?
Yeah.
Avoids probate. Okay. So speaking of family members, as I said, I'm skipping some sections of this for you to read on your own, or we'd be here for several weeks in that book. Do you have a pet? What kind of instructions would somebody need if they were to care for or inherit your pet? I don't think I'd wish my cat on anybody else at this point. I'd wish him to be loved, but he has some medical needs. But what would make it easy for somebody else to take care of your pet or pets? Nobody here has young children, but at least two have adult children that will probably be involved in this process. Are there things they need to know in terms of your home, in terms of somebody out there? They're adults, so they don't need somebody legally to support them. You'd have a whole another chapter of things to get in place if you had children that were not legal adults. But young adults may need some additional information just because they don't have that much experience in the world. If you have aging relatives whose care you are responsible for, whether or not they live in your home, there's probably some information that should be left about who their doctor is and how you make contact with various people that they may need if they're not able to do it themselves. I am actually compiling 4 notebooks of information for Brian and I, and then also one for my mother and one for his mother. Those 2 won't be as complete, but at least I'll have all the information in one place that I have when I need it or when we need it. Speaking of people, a list of key contacts. Do people in your family know who your friends are and how to reach them, particularly if they live in a different community? Who are people you would want at your funeral that your family either has no idea even exists or wouldn't know how to reach? That would make it easy for them if they've got a list. Who do you want to learn about your death before they read it in the paper or online? So making that kind of a list. You don't need your whole Christmas card address book if you still have one of those, or your whole phone contact list, but who are the key people? Who are coworkers if you're still working that somebody would need to notify, your supervisor, your business? Who are your neighbors and how would they get in touch with your neighbors if they don't already know them? One of the things that I am finding in recent years with more and more people, whether or not they are personally spiritual or religious, not being part of a church, they don't necessarily realize how important that church community is to their parents. So what religious organizations are important to you or organization? And if it's important for you to have a funeral in a church or a religious memorial service of some kind, make sure your kids know that, because otherwise you could end up being one of those, your kids, your heirs, whoever, because you could end up being, no service was held in the newspaper. And if you really don't want that, okay, my opinion is you need some kind of closure, even if it's not a service open to the public. Would you allow your church to do something simple to remember you, even if your kids don't want to be part of it? Um, Yeah, yeah, it would be. Mhm. Let. Mhm. Yeah, let your church know how you would like to be remembered. We've got here files for every member household or participant household in the church that's given us anything. And so I can keep records there of what people would like for their service, or other way of being remembered if your family doesn't want to deal with that, or your other people that might be making those arrangements. Are there other organizations that are important to you that you're involved in that would need to be notified, even if you're like you with Big Brothers Big Sisters, I know, and Dave with Lions, and all of you have various things. You know, what's important to you, even if your family knows that's important to you, who should they get in touch with? Okay, this was all, believe it or not, there's 3 main sections in that book. This was all the first section. So we've been an hour, including the break. The second section does have to do with the legal and financial pieces. And so that'll be next week to an extent. If you are active on the internet, you should at least consider a digital estate plan. This is a little different from knowing who has your passwords. But what do you want to happen to your email account, your social media account, those kinds of things? So there's a section in the book on that. I'm not going to spend time on it, but what do you want to have happen to those accounts? Do you have emails that you want deleted? I have personal journals that are not online, but I've destroyed most of them now. But I really, in writing, worked out some pretty difficult family issues. We all have them. And I really didn't want anybody reading those after I died. So I told Brian, make sure to destroy them. And I've decided they're taking up too much space. I destroyed them myself. But so, you know, if you got, that's not digital, but it's a similar kind of thing. Are there things that need to be gotten rid of so that the wrong people don't see them and it hurts relationships? So the last section is finishing touches. And I just want to mention a few of those, and we've already touched on a couple of them. One is memorabilia. You may have, we all have possessions that are very meaningful to us, that may or may not have financial value, but they have personal value. And you may have wishes about what happens to some of those things. Have conversations with your family or with whoever will be dealing with those if you're the last surviving member of your family. A lot of people use the masking tape on the back or the bottom of the item, or a list of, you know, these are things that may not be included in a will, but you may have particular people you want to get things to. We've got some family pieces, some antiques that I don't have any interest in. My brother did not have any interest in, but very, very important to my mom, they remain in the family. So I know which cousin, even though it's not going to be mentioned in the will, I know who should get that. So you can leave a list with your will, or put tape on things with names, or start giving things away now. We had a late member who had a whole lot of things from travels all over the world. And so whenever family came for a holiday dinner or something, he says, okay, everybody takes something off that shelf. You don't leave until you take something off that shelf. So yeah. Photographs. You know, I thought, you go back a couple generations, there weren't a lot of photographs. You know, it was an expensive and a rare process. And so passing on some family photographs wasn't a hard thing to decide about. I don't know how, we have a whole closet full of photographs, and that's before digital. My mother's got at least 4 or 5 totes of photographs. You know, we're accumulating lots of photos. Brian's mom. We have 4 boxes that are in our guest room still from when his sister died, and we were looking for pictures of her. What's going to happen to your photographs? What do you want to happen to your photographs? Do you care what happens to your photographs? Does somebody else care what happens to your photographs? Slides. Yep. You have slides. Is that what you're saying?
Like a carousel full of slides, and we have boxes of slides.
Mm-hmm.
Those are our photographs, older photographs.
Right. Dave.
Yeah, one way is to digitize them and take up a lot of
Yep.
that on.
Mm-hmm.
There's sort of a timeline for things. Which, are valuable in this generation, valuable in the next generation. And then as they become even older, they start to become valuable again. So I know of one case where a grandson walked into his grandmother's bedroom when she was very late in life. And he walked in because he smelled something burning. And she was starting to burn letters. And, she thought, well, geez, you burn letters at the end of life, right? The letters happened to be from the Revolutionary War.
Wow. Or you might take a cold winter day to at least, where you have 50 photographs of the same event, call them down to the best 10 or something like that too. So decide what you want to happen to those. Some people will make a photo album or maybe a digital photo album now and for each grandchild or something and make a gift of that. Okay, Polly's doing. Okay. Okay. So Polly's working on hers for kids and has given one for grandchild. I have found personally what's been helpful to me is all those photographs that are, collected for boards or for a slideshow for a memorial service. Send those to Shutterfly and put them in a book. And then you've got a small book and you can give copies of it to other family members if you want to. And that's part of your digital life too. If you're storing photos online, what's going to happen to that account? Okay, memorabilia, life lessons. Anything you want to pass on in terms of life lessons to those who come after you. There was some space to do that in the booklet that we handed out last week, if you want to do that. Some people choose to write letters to be given to people after they're gone. Might go into your funeral pre-planning if you have some things you want to have shared there so that everybody who is present, cares about you, is able to hear it. Recipes. That's another thing that's really important in some families, passing on grandma's favorite cookie recipe or something like that. So, think about if you don't care about it, don't put it in your list. But if it's something that's important to you or to your family, then make arrangements for the right person to get it. Planning a funeral. Already mentioned that a little bit. We had some forms out last week and they're still on the back table. Some of you have already done that. You can talk to a funeral home and make sure the plans are in place for that. That can include prepaying. It doesn't have to include prepaying. If you're in financial circumstances that are going to result in you going on Medicaid, that's something you want to prepay as you're spending down assets, or at least look into prepaying. Content of the service, if you have preferences of hymns or scriptures or stories or who's going to speak or where you'd like your ashes scattered or where you have a cemetery plot, that's another asset. That information needs to be left behind. As I said, there was some of that in the booklet last week. There's blue pieces of paper in the back of the church. negotiate with your family if you have different ideas than they do of what should be done. We had somebody that hated funerals and didn't want a funeral service, and their children did. And fortunately, they'd had these conversations ahead of time, and so they were able to negotiate, okay, a small service for family and very close friends. We'll meet everybody's needs. And then the other information, and this is the last little bit that I have in the book, is there's a section on what the defaults are if you don't make a particular kind of arrangement. Then what happens to this thing or this account or whatever. So that might spur some of us on too, if we haven't made the appropriate arrangements about beneficiaries or arrangements or whatever. Thoughts, comments, ideas? Okay. Okay. If you're going to write a letter to somebody, write it out of love. Don't write it to tell them how to live the rest of their life. Good wisdom. Thank you. Thank you. And again, we're up for Wednesday evening. We are recording this if you want to see it again, if you know somebody else that wants to see it. And we'll record Wednesday night if you can't be here. I will, if you have been here for the previous classes and aren't here that night, I'll make sure you hear from me. Okay. All right, let's close in prayer then. Thank you, God, again, for shared ideas and experiences. Some of them are more painful than others. We are grateful when, even with the most difficult ones, we can glean a little bit of wisdom as time goes on. Guide us to plan as an act of love. Be present with us throughout all of our lives, and help us to remember that in life and in death, we belong to you. In Christ's name we do pray. Amen. Okay.